Hey guys, Tarke here, and today I want to talk about Banners of Ruin. I wanted to quickly show you this just to show that I've played a fair bit of it. I've unlocked all its current Steam achievements. I've got 35.5 hours played. I started playing this game on the 26th. It's currently the 30th of December, and it's also on sale on Steam until the 5th of January. So the way this video is going to work is I'm going to briefly play a couple of rounds just so you get an understanding of how the game functions, and then we'll go into a deep breakdown of the things I like and dislike about the game. I've done a massive 10-page Google Doc. Anyone who's used to my usual content will know how my stuff works. If you are not used to my usual content, it's worth noting that I think this game has a lot of potential, and while I will be getting pretty heavy on my criticisms, that's because of my nature, not because I think this is a flawed product. Also, can we just very briefly appreciate the soundtrack and the awesome art style. That being said, I'm now going to turn the audio way down so it doesn't distract. And I'm just going to show you how this game functions. So this is a deck builder roguelite. You can save your runs midway through, which is something I really appreciate. But for this, I'll do a fresh run. So I'll abandon my current status. So this has got a very medieval red wall kind of art style. So if you grew up with those books, you'll really enjoy it. There are 6 playable races. Each race has unique talents. I really like the mice, so we'll go with 2 mice. And you can start with 1 if you want to only have 1, but start with a party of 2. And I'll explain the game as it goes on. If you've played anything like Slay the Spire or Gwent, you'll be kind of used to the system. The thing which is quite unique about this game is that you have the game boards and you have this city that you're traveling through. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure. You have to choose one of the 3 options. Every start starts exactly the same once you've picked your party. You get the option of a helping hand, which gives you the choice of 3 cards you can add to your starting deck. You can go straight into combat, or you can get a blanket 250 florins, which is gold that you use to buy more cards and hire more people for your group as you go on. So to start off, let's just pick an extra 1 of 3 cards to get added to my group. You get a little bit of lore, but we'll skip through this. And we get the choice of 3 cards. It's also worth noting that whenever you're offered cards in this game, you can actually forfeit taking a choice and not take anything, so that you don't dilute your card pool with bad choices. So of these 3, we'll take Rend. It's a good card. It does damage, applies some debuffs, and it only costs 1 stamina. The way resources work in this game is you have stamina and you have will. Will, you have a set amount, which is the amount you'll have for each combat, and it will reset at the end of each combat. Stamina resets at the end of each round. So we'll take Rend, and then we are now forced to enter the city, so we have this combat. And you get a little bit of lore, a little bit of explaining what's happening, and then you get into it. So the reason why I compared this game to Gwent is this uses a grid positioning based system. There are ranks, which are these lines here, and there are lanes, which is this. So think of lanes like bowling, you go down a lane, and then ranks as the sideways things. If you hover over enemies, you see who they're attacking. So this guy at the top will attack this mouse, this one will attack this mouse. Armor will dampen any incoming damage before stuff goes to health. The exception of that is bleed, which bypasses armor and goes straight to health. Armor resets at the end of every combat. Health, there is very limited healing, so you really want to protect your health. Because this has positioning, there's actually a lot of positioning micromanagement you can do. So as we can see, this mouse is attacking this position, but if we use withdraw, which applies armor and moves the target, we can move him down here, but this mouse is still targeting here, so he'll end up doing nothing. So there's actually quite a few different systems. So this guy, he's using an axe and a shield, so because of that we have the shield card in our deck, which gives us an effect, so we gain some armor. We also gain this, which we give to this guy, and then we attack, so I'm going to use more armor management, attack the mouse. And we'll focus down the mouse. Once he's down, that's one enemy to worry about. And you can kind of see how the combat system works. And now you can see what the enemy is going to be doing by this little icon at their feet. So this mouse will deal 2 damage 3 times. And this hair at the top will do 6 damage stab and apply a 1 damage bleed. So bleed, because that affects our health, is something we want to be very cautious of. But fortunately, we have some pretty good turns available to us, so we're going to use the longsword to do damage to the entire rank, so I'll hit both of them. Putting him down to 1. This guy's got 14 health. What we can do, though, is to, again, just show off the positioning aspect of this game, is we can use kick. So if we kick him, he goes back to this rank, and this is the rank who's currently attacking. So this guy basically skips his turn. So that's really strong. Now let's just do a bunch of damage. Momentum gives us charge, which is just like a ramping damage buff to our next attack. If we discard a card, so we discard this card. This guy's now got +3. And rush deals your damage ×3. But because you've got this buff, we'll now hit this guy for a whole bunch of damage. So we end the turn. He does his attack. His attack gets bypassed. And now we can very quickly just clean up. So it doesn't matter who we hit, because we just had enough damage in hand. And you can kind of see how this combat would work. Now, at the end of each combat, you get some flat currency, and you also get the choice of 3 cards. And again, if you want to, you can just pick nothing. So if you don't like any of the options, you can pick nothing. That being said, Vanguard is decent, so we take Vanguard. We take our money. We move on. And then we get presented with another series of choices. So you can kind of see how this game functions. I'll do one more round just so you can understand the basics, and then I'll get into my thoughts on the game. But I've been really enjoying this. It meshes enough different genres to keep deck building and roguelikes interesting. And with the very clean presentation and everything, I just really enjoy the setup. It also has a lot of layering when it comes into the building. So not only does each race matter, because different races get access to different cards and different passives and talents when they level up. You then have the positioning to worry about, the deck building to manage about, different gear gives different stats and bonuses, and you end up with lots of really cool layers. So again, if we look at this, what can we do this turn? So he's attacking the top mouse, he's attacking the bottom mouse. We mostly worry about my top mouse having low armor, so once again, I'm going to withdraw him. We'll move him down here. So now this guy's attack will fluff. This guy's going to do 8 damage. So let's focus on dealing with this one first. So we'll use Hatchet, because this guy's using a Hatchet. Deals 8 damage. If it breaks the target's armor, he gains charge. So, does he break the armor? He now has the buff. So now Rush will do 9 total damage. And this guy's got Sharpened Steel, which deals weapon damage, which is 8 because of the weapon he's using, and applies a bleed of 4. Now, we could just focus it all in on this guy, just to force him down, but we have enough armor that his damage doesn't matter, so instead I'm just going to split my damage across the group, so I can kill both of them next round. The main thing really is just about protecting your health at all costs. And mice have a thing that when they attack, they'll then, like, move around. But fortunately, we have enough damage that we can just clean up now. So you can go to there, 5 damage. You do your swipe. And this mouse will now die to the bleed at the next turn. So we actually don't have to play any more cards to win this. Now, this might be like, oh, this seems really easy, Tarke. There's actually a lot of stuff that layers on there. And based on the options you get early on, the early game difficulty can actually be really difficult. So in here, Withdraw's a really good card, but we only have 1 will available. So I don't want to dilute my pool too much with this. So in fact, I'm actually just not going to take anything for this one. We'll take some more florins, we'll move on. And, right, so now we get a bunch of options. So you can see we get an option of XP to the entire group. Blackfoot Contract is a chance to heal. You'll see that these have numbers at the top, these counters. These dictate how long they'll be available. So this has a counter of 1, a counter of 1, a counter of 2. Meaning these choices will go away immediately, but because this is a counter of 2, this choice will persist. So this gives a chance to improve. A chance to improve is always very strong. Once again, you get a little bit of lore. And then we can choose a character to give them a bonus of maximum vitality. So we'll just pick Cosworth here. So now he gets a boost of health. Again, we've now got some more choices. These are all positive choices. We're full health, so we don't need this. We don't need the health here. We do want the XP. So now we will level up on the next combat encounter. So I'll do one more combat encounter just to see what leveling up looks like, and then I'll get into my thoughts on the game. Every time you go in, you get randomly selected enemies. There are a lot of different enemy types available. We're just happening to see a lot of hares and mice as the early game enemies. So that's focusing on the top one, the top one. All right, so they're all focusing on this top guy. So perfect. We move him, and we basically skip the entire enemy first round. Let's focus on getting down the wee mice. So We could do this 8 damage, gain the bonus of 2, and then use Vanguard. So that would be an actual total of 20 damage, which would actually be complete overkill on this guy. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on getting down this cheeky little fella here. So I'm going to use Hatchet first, gain the buff, hit him, we get a bonus of 4 damage because we're in the front rank. And then with this guy, we're just going to buff his armor, because he has lower armor. The reason why he has lower armor than this guy is when you start a character, there are 2 sets of equipment you get. One has a medium armor, hatchet, and a shield. The other has a 2-handed sword and light armor, which has less armor than medium armor, gives you bonus stamina each round. Which is also why this guy has 1 more stamina than this guy. So you can see we evaded all their attack. They've gained this buff because of a perk these guys have, which gives them bonus armor if they have 3 characters start each round. So if we once again look through our options, this guy will apply bleed, as will this guy, and we really don't want them to start ramping bleeds on our characters. So ideally, we would take out both of these 2 in 1 turn, but let's see if we actually have enough damage to do that. Now, we could definitely kill this guy, because obviously he only has 2 health, but most of the cards in hand do a lot more damage than 2, so we don't really want to, like, overkill with our damage too much. So let's just do some quick maths real quick. So this will do a total of 12 damage. This will do a total of 10 damage. This guy has 22 health, so in fact we can do this. He will now bleed out at the start of his next turn because he has 4 health and 4 bleed left over. We'll then throw Rend into you to finish him off. And then we can just armor up and you'll be attacking this bottom mouse. So let's pump all the armor into that. Another thing that this game does is it has a draw pile and a discard pile, which my cam is currently hiding. And what happens is you build up your discard pile until you have no cards left in your deck. And then your discard pile gets shuffled back into your main deck. So we have kick, so we could kick this guy off his turn to bypass his turn entirely. So again, just to show off some of the mechanics, we will do that. Does it matter who we do it on? Not really. So we'll say that the top mouse kicks you. We will then deal 5 damage. And we'll just focus on dealing damage at this point. Another 5 damage, and sadly Rush will be just 1 short, and this last card is an armor buff, and we gain the pacify effect, which means you cannot do anything more that turn. So you can see how you're actually really rewarded for like making good sense of all the different systems. So we'll just do anything to finishing off. We gain a card, they level up, so once again we get a choice of 3. Invigorating Blow is actually a pretty good card, so it costs 0, deals 8 damage, which is great in the early game because it has a 0 cost, so you can just throw it out every turn. And if you manage to buff up your damage so it deals 15 or higher, you gain a bonus 2 stamina to spend that turn, and you gain 4 restoration, which is a buff that gives you healing until it ticks down. So we'll pick Invigorating Blow, gain our Florins. And now when you level up, you'll get a choice of a talent, and then you can upgrade either your stamina or will, the first level. The next level you get a choice of a passive, again an upgrade, and then it swaps between talent, passive, talent, passive. So we'll get an option of 3 talents. Again, you can forfeit taking a talent completely if you don't like any of the options, because these talents will go into your deck. So you have the option of Calculating Strike, which deals damage and gives Preparation, which is a card draw mechanic. Converts this character's charge into 3 times as much armor. Double the character's armor. So Calculating Strike is really good. I don't really like these 2 that much, so we take that. And we'll just focus on upgrading our stamina early. The next character, what did we get? Let's see, we got Plague Doctor, which is whenever this character receives damage from poison, a random ally gains restoration, and Banish. What Banish does is there's the draw pile, and then the banish pile, and a discard pile. If you banish a card, that means it's gone. You won't see it again for the remainder of that combat. So this is actually really good because it's just something you activate once at the start of combat, and it persists for the entire combat round. So if you're going against poison damage regularly, this is really good. That being said, poison isn't that common of a debuff currently, so this isn't that great. This is a 0 cost, so great, doesn't cost anything. If your target has more health on an active character, draw a card. If less health, discard a card. You can choose to just not play this. So this would be the best choice of the three, since it's a free card, which gives card draw early on. And if we don't have a chance to use it, then you just don't have to play it. And once again, we'd upgrade our stamina or will. You can manage your party. You can swap gear around. There's a stash system so that when you collect gear from killing certain enemies, you can hoard it. You can also mess around with combat positions. So there's actually like a lot of strategy and planning that goes into this game. And very briefly, just so you see what the vendors look like. Here we roll the vendor. So we open up, they have a limited card pool, and they'll cost florins. And you can see the florins we have available at the top here. And you get the idea of how this game works. I'm basically just a really big fan of the presentation and everything. So, before we get into the feedback aspect of the video, it's also worth noting that this is an indie game being made by a very small team of British developers, so support you're in there. And even though this is in early access, they are actively still updating the game. There was actually a big update that came out on the 18th of December, I believe. And I can quickly show you the roadmap here so you can get an idea of how far along it is in development. We are somewhere around this section, I believe. So there's still a lot to be added. And it's also worth noting that I actually paid for this game myself. I'm not being paid or sponsored doing this. I'm just doing this video because I really like the game. So now let's destroy everything about this game and go into all the crazy, all of these problems. So let's start off with what I like. So I'm a big fan of the core gameplay loop. There's enough variety and choices to be made each round that it keeps it exciting and fresh. And because of the RNG nature, you're always tempted to be, oh, one more run, let's just go. So you could get the extra florins. And, you know, you can quite easily see how this choose-your-own-adventure thing could actually turn out to be quite exciting. So here we ran and we got a weapon chest early on. So now we can choose between some armors and some we actually got really lucky with the weapon types here. So we got a upgraded greatsword, which does more damage than the greatsword we currently had. We gained exquisite sword, which is a really nice one hand, which has a attack 3 times you gain armor. And then we gained some heavy armors and some superior heavy armors, which are really strong, which we can store the armors for later. In terms of gearing, basically every single armor tier will have like a base version, then the superior version, which is just slightly better. And then there's quite a lot of different weapons. I haven't actually seen all the weapons currently available to you. So you can see what the heavy armor does. Start each combat round with 30 armor. You gain 5 armor and 1 winded every turn. Winded is a debuff that makes you lose 1 stamina equal to the amount of winded you have. And then it's removed. So it's got quite a good balance system of this stuff is really good for giving you constant armor every turn, but it reduces your overall stamina every turn. So you can get the idea there. Also, what I'll do is I'll quit to the main menu to show you the compendium, just to kind of give you more of an example of the amount of actual variety there is. So you can see the even amount I've played. There's still a couple of cards I haven't seen yet, but I have seen most of them at this point. So in terms of cards, you can see at the top here, I've encountered 203 of 289. There are skills, talents, weapons, runes, passives. Now, when it comes to talents, there are ones which every race gets access to, and then there are race-specific talents. You can see that a lot of the races I haven't seen all of them for. Beavers, weasels, mice. And then you can see all the different weapons that you can encounter in your run. Again, there are a couple I haven't seen yet. And then ruins is something I'll get into later in more depth. And again, with passives. Here are all the passives you could see. And then specific ones. And you can see I actually haven't encountered a lot of the race-specific passives. So there's a lot of layers of game building to this game. So yeah, I love the core gameplay loop. Visuals and presentation. This is great. So I'm a massive fan of roguelikes. I'm a massive fan of deck builders. But I don't play as many roguelikes and as many deck builders in particular as I would like to, because a lot of the games really fail when it comes to presentation, and that's something that Banners of Ruin does really well. The soundtrack. I'll turn the sound back up so you can hear it a bit more. But the soundtrack, I think, does a really good job of being understated while still feeling quite epic and like grandiose. And it never really distracts from the overall play experience. It just kind of like lingers in the background. And I find that I often end up just kind of like humming it along to myself even when I'm no longer playing the game. I really, really love everything when it comes to the audio and visual presentation of this game. I'll just turn that back down again now. So, it also has fairly simplistic base mechanics, which makes banners pretty easy to pick up. A lot of card games are really focused on this is what I do unique, this is what I do special. And with that, it can make it very difficult to get into it. But with banners, it's pretty straightforward. You have the ranks, you have the lanes, you have 2 resources, you manage the resources, and that's kind of it. However, as I showed you, there's enough depth and complexity in the kind of builds. You even saw it a little bit with how I was like manipulating the enemy positioning. That there's actually a lot that can go on there. So just to briefly go into it, you have race-specific perks, gearing, character passives, character talents, group size, positioning, and then the actual choose your own adventure path stuff, which is like very unique to banners. That I think that's probably my favorite aspect of the game. Also, there is the fact that you can close the game at any point and then continue your run, which is really good and something that I wish more games did more of. Now, what happened there, and this is actually a little exploit that should be mentioned, is the way the quitting thing works is it puts you back to your most recent encounter. So because I quit mid looking at a weapon stash, it let me take the weapons, but then put me back at the weapon stash. So in theory, if you wanted to be a little cheeky and abuse the fact that, you know, it's an early access, you could get a weapon stash and then constantly quit, re-roll the same thing over and over and over again. So that's something that they should probably fix and look into at some point. But otherwise, the fact that you can continue from any point is really nice. And aside from these one little things, it's actually something that I wish more roguelikes in particular would do. Because that as a genre, what tends to happen with roguelites is you get trapped into a run. Like, you kind of go, okay, the run will be roughly from this time to this time. But then you have that one particular god run that runs for hours and hours. And you're like, I really have other stuff I need to be doing. So I really like that. The early game difficulty, I'd say, is in a pretty good spot. It might have seemed pretty easy from the fact that I just, like, bypassed all the enemy turns. But I've played the game a lot, and I got very lucky with the options early on. When I first started playing, I took a lot of damage early. And if you actually look at, like, the Steam reviews, a lot of the complaints like, this game is too difficult. I'd actually say that the one problem with the difficulty is with certain builds that can come online quite early, you can find the end content fairly trivial. Or maybe not trivial, but like, it's not that difficult, but you have these very long, grindy fights sometimes. So it can sometimes feel a little bit off. That being said, if we just abandon that run quickly, when you make a run, they have this oath system, which are basically these debuffs you can apply, which adds, well, basically negative effects. So this one is unplayed cards left in hand are banished rather than discarded. Whenever you add a card to your deck, you lose florins. Enemies regain vitality per turn. It has tiers. So if you want to make the game more difficult for you, you could stack a bunch of different oaths. So there is like a slight difficulty scale in there that you can manipulate if you want to do stuff, you know, harder or easier for yourself. In terms of performance and bugs, so I guess that exploit is worth mentioning. Because of that quit at any point thing, if you did like lose a combat before you like finally lost to manage your run, you could quit the game at any point, come back in and restart that encounter from fresh. So if you wanted to game that system in its current state, you could, which I guess is something worth mentioning when it comes to like performance and bugs. Otherwise, though, the performance is really stable. It is a card game, so it's not going to be like super heavy on your FPS. But yeah, you always have a standard 60 FPS or everything. I think the only time the FPS ever actually dips is sometimes in the main menu screen. In terms of bugs, there are 2 bugs I've encountered. I guess technically 3 if you count that little exploit that I accidentally showed off there. There's one card that manipulates the discard pile and it draws cards from the discard pile back into your hand. Sometimes that can cause a game freeze, in which case you just quit, restart, and it's fixed. I've played that card upwards of 20 times and encountered the bug twice. And the only other bug I've personally encountered was I lost a run. I died, but I died while hovering over a tooltip, and the tooltip carried back to the main menu. But otherwise, I'd say for a early access, the performance and the bugs are very minimal. So getting into what I dislike about the game. And from this point out, everything will be dislikes and heavy criticism. So if you don't like that content, then stop the video here. Great game, check it out. So what I dislike about the game. The current progression system. So the actual progression system nerfs your overall efficiency when it comes to playing the game. So as you play, when you finish a run, you get rewarded account XP. And there's this little thing called unlocks. And you can tell this is very much a placeholder. And if I move my cam, you can see I'm the max level 10, I know, God Gamer. So the way that this works is there are 3 different random things. They've decided the warrior, the priest, and the rogue. And within each one, there'll be a bunch of passives and a bunch of cards. So these are the warrior passives and the warrior cards that you can unlock. Basically, as you level up, you get tokens, and you spend the tokens to unlock things. Makes sense, right? The problem is some of these talents and some of these cards are really good, but actually quite a lot of them are actually just not very good at all. And once you've unlocked them, they then get added to the available card and the available talents and the available passive pool, which sounds great, but then what you realize you're doing is if you're not paying attention, you just unlock everything earlier like I did, you actually nerf the overall available pool. Now, this is on me for just unlocking everything instinctively, but I feel like if games have progression systems that push the player into making a choice, they shouldn't be punished by that choice. For my Path of Exile players, this is very similar to the initial state we had with Atlas and Path of Exile, where the new player experience is to unlock everything on the Atlas, but in doing so, you actually nerf your overall efficiency. So this is something I would like to see changed. What a lot of games do in this genre is they have it so that you level up, but when you level up, you just unnaturally unlock cards. If they want to stick with this current system, don't make this a choice. Just have it so that you just naturally unlock everything, so that way the player isn't actually willingly nerfing themselves. Because in theory, if I really wanted to min-max my Banners of Ruin experience now, I would now buy Banners of Ruin on a fresh Steam account and purposely only unlock some of the things, which that's just silly. Like, that's a big no. And that's basically it. That's currently the only progression that's in the game. Now, it is worth noting this is a very early access, and there's a lot of stuff currently missing. Again, going back to the roadmap, there's a lot that's yet to be added on there. They haven't got their full late game system. They haven't got, like, loads of stuff yet. So I'm sure that this is just very much a placeholder they've put in for now. But the progression system definitely needs work. I'd also say that my next complaint would be the starting deck and equipment is static. So at the start of every run, yes, you can change which race you have, but every race is the same starting deck, and every race is the same starting equipment. This guy on the left will start with medium armor, a shield, and a sword. This guy on the right will always start with light armor and a two-handed sword. There's enough diversity and options as you get into a run, but now that I've basically exhausted the content, so to speak, always having the same static start, it does feel a little bit boring because it takes a while for a run to really kind of come online. So having more diversity in the start equipment would just make the replayability of the game go up significantly. I'd say the current game balance, as I said earlier, is fairly decent overall. However, when we look at the talent options, a lot of the talents aren't actually that strong. Like, the disparity in the strength of some to others is ridiculously high. So what can happen quite often, sadly, is when I level up and I get the choice of 3 talents, I get offered 3 talents, none of which I want, and then I want to just bypass taking a talent completely. You don't level up all that often. The max level is 8. So when you're not seeing talents that often, it feels very bad having to forfeit talents. Now, it is worth mentioning that there are encounters that let you reroll talents later on, so even when offered 3 bad choices, it's still worth taking one to reroll later. But it means for the entire time that you have that bad talent, you've basically got a bad card in your deck pool, diluting your pool, and that just doesn't feel great. Also, on that note, I'd say there's a pretty big disparity in the strength of stamina and will-based cards. There are a few incredibly powerful cards that use will. This is a really good example. You select a target and you gain their current bleed stacks, double their current bleed stacks as rune, which basically means that if someone has like 50 bleeds and you hit them with this, you then have 100 bleeds stored on your next hit. Bloodbath is amazing for just like instantly wiping out entire groups. You basically just get one character, focus all of your bleeds into that one character, and you just spread them around with Bloodbath. Super powerful when you get it. But then, like, compare this to this card here. So this is 1 stamina, 1 will cost. This costs 3 stamina, 1 will. all party members gain 4 bleed, apply total bleed to a target. So the max party size is 6. So that'd be 6 times 4, 24, quick maths. So you get to apply 24 bleed to one target while also applying a negative debuff to your entire group. Meanwhile, with Bloodbath, you can regularly apply bleeds, you know, upwards of 50, upwards of 100. Yeah, huge disparity in strength and balance when it comes to that sort of stuff. Also, this game is oddly racist. And what I mean by this game is oddly racist, hear me out here. The races aren't made equally. And when it comes to party size and party composition, even though there are all of these really cool specific races, the best strat is actually to always just focus on just stacking one race. So my most played races are the Mouse, Hare, and Weasel. So whenever I do it, what I'll do is I'll basically do like one run as double Weasel, and then the next run I'll do double Hare, then the next run I'll do double Mouse. There's a card which buffs the character that uses it and all adjacent characters of the same race, and it's a really powerful card. Sadly, there isn't yet a card which buffs having diverse groups, and because of the strength of that one card, it basically means the best strategy is to always just stack one race in particular. So what this ends up happening is you end up not using the wide breadth of options available to you, and it also means you're far more likely to run smaller groups than doing bigger groups, because the way you hire additional members is you have two options. There's one random encounter where you basically find someone who's just wandering around. It's like, hey, I'll join your party. That's option 1. It's very rare, though. The more likely option is at the end of like each travel section, there'll be a set mini-boss. And at the end of, just before that boss fight, you get the option of going to a tavern where you can hire people for a large florin cost. The way that will work is you'll get the option of 3 random characters who are pre-leveled, and they have pre-roll talents and passives and races. So if you're going for a Weasel stacked group, when there's currently 6 races, it's not that likely there'll be a Weasel in that like selection there. So you're likely not mainly going to be hiring that many more, and also XP is shared across the party. So the larger your party is, the less XP each individual member has. As a result of that, I found the most success in doing parties of even sometimes just 1 to 3. And I never really go above 3. I would say the most optimal party size, if you want to have the largest group possible, would be 4. But going past that, I feel is actually a negative. Getting back into the balance side of things, bleed as a debuff is by far the most powerful debuff. And it feels like nearly every deck I make ends up using bleed. When I end up doing non-bleed runs, I'm going poison. Poison actually has some incredibly powerful passives and talents, which are available to everyone. The main one being Plagued, which is whenever this character plays a card, 1 poison is applied to a random opponent. The way that poison works is poison deals damage every turn, and every round the damage ramps by 1. So it very quickly ramps up to insane levels. If you do longer fights. I guess it very slowly ramps up to insane levels because it persists the entire fight, just constantly ticking higher and higher damage. This is really good in conjunction with Toxic, which is whenever this character receives damage, the attacker gains 1 poison. So when I get this combo together, what I'll tend to do is I'll have my frontline character in the front middle rank with Toxic, so they're the main one who gets focused. I have the character behind it with Plagued, and I play all of my cards on the character with Plague. So he's playing all the cards, so he's applying all the poison, the other guys are applying poison and if he gets hit, synergy occurs. And there's finally Pestilence, which is on turn 9, double the stacks of poison on all opponents. So poison is sometimes one of the best strategies, but it's only really strong in terms of passives and talents, but the actual card pool, there's only 1 card in the entire card pool which interacts with poison, and it's not that strong. So yeah, the balance definitely needs a bit of work. One other debuff which is definitely worth mentioning is Cripple. So the way that Cripple works is you apply Cripple to an enemy. It's a persistent effect, it stays there forever. And whenever the character moves, they take damage equal to stacks of crippled, and then it ticks down by 1. So you're like, oh, that seems really good. You did loads of like player positioning in those combat rounds we saw, Tarke. This sounds like a great debuff, especially with like this card. Like for 2, it's applying 4 bleed and 10 cripple. That's awesome. Yes and no. So it's great if you're moving people every turn, but most of the cripple cards are quite rare, and they tend to have quite high costs associated when you compare them to their bleed counterpoint. So for example, looking at Rake, this is deal 9 damage to an entire rank, so it's an AoE swipe. And if the enemy has bleed, you apply 16 cripple. So you're like, wow, that's great, 16 cripple. But it's dependent on having bleed already on the target, and cripple only does something if you then move them. So this card has 3 situational effects. It needs to first be against a bleeding enemy, you then need to use Rake, and then you need a 3rd card to then reposition them. And if you're playing a deck which already has bleed, well, you'd be better off focusing on bleed synergy cards than cripple synergy cards. Again, it's just balancing things. The stash system. So the stash system I showed you earlier is really good, and I like that you can add things in. This was something which was recently added in an update. However, the way the stash system works is it actually dissuades you from hoarding good weapon types, because if you put a weapon in the stash, it counts as being part of your deck. So each weapon, when you have it equipped or in your stash, will add its card to the deck, but it's only playable by the character who currently has that weapon equipped. So because it's in the stash, no one has it equipped, so you basically just have a dead weapon in your stash at all times, which sucks. So I only ever use the stash for hoarding armor. And this is another thing which makes having larger groups less attractive, because you're less likely to go, oh, I found this really good weapon for a future character, because you can only hire future characters at set points at the end of runs, and at which point you've then just had this dud card diluting the strength of your deck this entire time in the meantime. Race-specific talents and passives. So, going back to the passive system, you can see like how few I've actually encountered. You can see I've seen most of the mice ones, I've seen about half of the weasel ones, but I've only seen like 2 of the hare ones. Considering I've basically only played hare, weasel, and mouse for coming up on 40 hours now, and I'm still missing that many, I just feel like the balancing is a bit off. I feel like the race-specific options should be much more common, and the agnostic options available to everyone should be less common. This would also make the race you pick more important, and would make you more likely to mix up your groups. If you're like, well, if I pick a mouse, I'm definitely going to get the mouse options, and if I pick a beaver, I'm definitely going to get the beaver options. Because some of the other races have very good ones. For example, the one I have seen for beaver, Absolute Unit, is whenever this character is healed in combat, their vitality is healed to max. So basically, if they get any heal, they heal to full, which is great, but it's super rare that you'll ever see this. The current oath system. So the oath system I showed currently, it's pretty tacked on. What I mean by that is, yes, it's just a fun little thing you can do to make runs feel more difficult, but the only reward for using the oath system is you get an XP multiplier, which my cam is currently blocking, see it here. So that one gives you a multiplier for 2.5, 1.1, 1.1, etc. So you're like, oh, that seems great, you gain more account XP, awesome. Well, no, because I capped out all account XP because the progression system is just a placeholder in about 20 hours of play, never using oaths. This is a roguelike, and games like these, if you get into them, you're going to be playing for hundreds of hours. I'm nowhere near done with this game. I'm planning on doubling, tripling, quadrupling my current playtime, and until they add any more to the progression system, there's no incentive for me to utilize oaths other than for just a bit of fun. I would say an easy fix of this would obviously, one, be update the progression system as the early access progresses, but also have it so oaths have some upside as well as a downside to the actual run itself. So maybe if I use an oath, I get a multiplied amount of gold I gain, or maybe for each oath I have equipped, I can ban one card from appearing in the card pool, or I get a new option for start equipment. There's loads of ways they could go about it, but yeah, currently oaths just feel a bit tacked on. Then the ruin system. So the ruin system is something I briefly mentioned earlier, going back into the compendium. Also, I love this fact this game has a compendium. So ruins are something you'll see fairly often. So when you get the pathways, the 1, 2, 3 options, it's quite regular during that like campaign action, they call it, that you'll be offered a action which will give you an upside but will ruin a card. And what that means is you select a card from your deck, and it's transformed into a random ruin card. There are currently 9 ruin cards, and all the ruin cards are basically not very good and have negative effects. So for example, this one, you just apply 10 bleed to yourself. There are some niche passives that benefit being bled, but it's incredibly unlikely that you'll have those passives when you get the access to get this ruin card. And again, because you get given a random ruin card, it's one of those things where even if you in theory wanted to make a deck which was all about using this one specific ruin card and that one specific passive, you'd have to first get that one specific passive and then get a 1 in 9 chance to get this, and you'd be turning a potentially good card into a potentially terrible card. However, I do like the opportunity cost of the fact that it's like, it's a story progression. Maybe you got to bypass a combat encounter, and that was the opportunity cost. It's either you have the combat encounter where you could either die losing your run or take damage, which is hard to heal, or you could take this negative effect. That I really like. That's a pretty good balance. However, there's a lot of cards which interact with Rune. So here, Carnage, for example. Ruin a card in hand. Any rune that happens in combat is temporary. It resets the end of combat. Any ruin that happens during that campaign, the traveling section, that's permanent. Now, what this card says is take a card in your current hand, turn it into a random bad something to then gain an okay-ish effect. And the way that this card works is it wants you to play it again and again, like ramping. So the Ruin synergy cards aren't strong enough to justify building a deck around bad cards or turning your deck into a deck of bad cards. It just feels kind of tacked on. It feels not fully fleshed out. And I would say this doesn't matter that much, but it's literally, the game's called Banners of Ruin, so when it's like the title name mechanic, you kind of want that to be like something really nailed down. I do think runes as a system work amazingly for the campaign stuff, but then like the Ruin synergy decks is just like if you're playing Magic the Gathering, you wouldn't build a deck of, if I make a deck of only bad cards and I get all the right combo pieces in the right order, I could maybe play an okay card. Like, if it was a you do this and then you win, Exodia style, that would be fine, but it's not. It's you do all of this and then you have a okay effect. Also, there's a lot of cards which are just very reactive. Field Dressing is a good example. And because at the end of every turn you discard your hand, you can't save cards for later. So bleed is one of the most dangerous debuffs in the game. I'm always very scared when I see an enemy can bleed one of my targets. So Field Dressing is an amazing card. You remove all bleed on an ally and you apply 5 armor. So you get rid of a scary debuff and give a buff effect. Awesome, I want this in my deck. Yes, but also no, because you can't guarantee which card you draw each round, and you can't guarantee when the enemy will bleed you. Most of the time I put Field Dressing in my deck, I end up just using it for the 5 armor, because when I have it, there's no bleeds, I'll use it, and then the next turn I then get bleed upon me. This is just a problem of having very reactive cards in a game where you discard your hand constantly. In any other card game, like Magic the Gathering or something like Hearthstone, you weaken your deck by putting these niche reactive cards in there, but the reward is that when you are in that specific situation, you get big upside. In those games, you can hoard these cards in hand until the perfect opportunity, but you never have that option in this game. A lot of cards are very immediate in their effect. They either like take effect in the turn they're played, or they will take effect when the next combat round happens, like when the enemy that has their next attack. There's some which persist indefinitely, some which persist for a couple of rounds. There's lots of like now or nothing type cards, and a lot of those now or nothing type cards I feel like should have some kind of persistent effect, just to make them more viable and more worth taking. However, it is worth noticing with Field Dressing here, it still gives you a positive effect. It's still a strictly better guard, which is just a card you just get in the starting deck. So a lot of these cards, the devs have thought about it by still making it like, hey, it's just a better guard card, which is sometimes really good when it removes the bleed entirely. Next up, so that's all my complaints on. These are just some ideas and some stuff I would like to see improved and just some things I've come up with myself. Diversity between runs. So as I've said, you have this set starting situation. With like, yeah, okay, you get an option of 6 races, but the race-specific stuff is quite rare, and it's always the same starting each time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some things that other games have done, the ones I think would work well for this, and then go into some of my own options. So, first off, since we mentioned earlier, Hearthstone. Hearthstone Battlegrounds has grown a lot, and as it has grown, Blizzard has introduced more cards and family of cards into the available pool. However, that game is very much balanced about having a set amount of cards available at each mana. So like at mana 1, you get access to these, at rank 2, these, rank 3, so on and so forth. So to maintain a tight balance and a good card pool while wanting to constantly add to it, you would have to previously just nerf everything down and removing it from the game, which is just wasting content, because you're making content and have to pull out old content. That's not a good system. So the way that Battlegrounds gets around this is by introducing family pools. So at the start of every game of Battlegrounds, a rotation is picked at random, and 3 families will be selected. Let's say Murlocs, Dragons, and Mechs. And for that game, no Murlocs, Dragons, or Mechs can turn up, and any heroes that are dependent on Murlocs, Dragons, or Mechs also don't turn up. So the equivalent for this game is maybe they would say, okay, well for this round we're going to do no poison cards. So there will be no poison cards available, and there'll also be no weasels, because weasels are kind of built around poisons. And they could have a system kind of like that. So maybe the next round, no cripples. There'll be no cripple cards and no hair cards. Now, currently, when bleed is such a dominant strategy and such a dominant meta, you'd be like, as long as bleed wasn't removed, you wouldn't care. But then if bleed was removed, you're like, oh my god, it'd be a completely different game. Ideally, you would need a better balance system for this to really work. But considering each race has its very specific niche, and there are all these different mechanics, there's, off the top of my head, bleed, poison, cripple, retaliate, banish, draw, rune. I've already gotten 7, and I'm sure there's more that I'm forgetting about. You could actually very easily make these archetypes and bundles. So that's one way they could go. And it's also worth mentioning, it's a system which is very much friendly to adding updates. You could very easily add more mechanics and more races to the game with time, and it would slot perfectly into that kind of system. A much softer system, which is a lot less work to implement as well, is using the Hades system. So Hades uses a far softer system to deter players from using the same starting option every run. Because that's the thing, not only do you want to offer diversity, you also want to stop the same dominant strategy every single time. So for example, if I decided that mice were the best race, you don't want me playing mice every single game, because I'll burn out on only playing mice. So what Hades does is Hades has an option of 6 weapons. There are 6 weapons you can have, and each weapon has its specific upgrades, but there are 6 base weapon types. At the end of every Hades run, one of these 6 weapons will be randomly selected to gain a buff. That buff gives a slight increase to resources earned with that weapon. It's a really subtle thing because you're not removing player options, you're just rewarding the player making a different choice. So because of that one system, if you want to stack resources to get unlocks, you're very likely to always use a different weapon every time, because it will always select a different weapon. So that's just a great system, because no one's getting punished. If I want to do mice every game, I can do mice every game. But if you decide that bears actually have this buff, I'm incentivized to maybe do a bear game. So that makes sense, right? The other thing which is great about the system is it's a good way of encouraging players to revisit mechanics they previously turned down or decided against. So with Hades, the railgun that was my example. When I first unlocked the railgun in Hades, I did a couple of runs of it, didn't really like it, didn't mesh with my playstyle, and I'm like, I'm never using that again. I don't like the railgun. But then, like, the next day, once I'd been playing like 20 hours of Hades, the railgun had the buff, and I thought, yeah, sod it, I'll do one more railgun round. And at that point, the playstyle just really clocked with me. You know, I'd spent more time playing Hades, I'd spent more time mastering systems, and now that gun that previously I hated felt really good. This is a problem that a lot of games run into when they have wide character pools. I'm sure we've all had this experience with like a fighting game or a card game, where the first time you try a character or a deck, it just doesn't work. You're like, oh, well, that character's just trash. But actually, it isn't. You just had bad luck, or you weren't very good at the time, and if you just went back to that thing, you'd actually have a lot of fun. So that's a system which I think would work really, really well. Next up is a draft system. This is probably my preferred option. Draft systems are notorious when it comes to card games. They just are a great way of offering replayability. So the way a draft system works is, instead of having a set starting deck, you would let players draft cards So you would just go to the compendium, you take the entire selection of cards, and you pick one of 3, 15 times, or however many times it is. I can't actually remember how large the starting deck is, and that's your deck for that run. It's a really fun system. It's a very popular system. It's a system that is something that's in every card game. People would quickly understand what it is, and it'd just be a great way of adding a lot of diversity. The other good thing about a draft system is draft systems are great for, again, encouraging players to make builds they wouldn't normally play. So using Cripple as an example, which I'm like, yeah, Cripple is okay. It kind of works, but it's very niche. If in the first 5 rows I got offered a bunch of very strong Cripple cards, I'd be like, you know what, maybe we should do a Cripple run. And I'm like, sod it, let's do a Cripple run. And then we build up a Cripple deck. Draft systems have insane replayability, and again, they promote people from going outside the norm. That's the main thing with diversity. You want to push players into changing their strategies. Another quite simple approach would actually just be for the devs themselves to introduce more starting card bundles. This is something that they could add in over time. It would allow players to just select which bundle they wanted based on what they've got unlocked in their account. I'm not saying monetize it, because that's kind of scummy, but that is something you could do if you wanted to monetize. Don't do that. Another upside of that system is it's a great way for new players to learn the cards, because it's like, okay, I've learned how to use this one bundle, now it's trying to learn how to use this next bundle of cards, now it's trying to use this next deck. It's a good way of teaching players. It's also a very good way of adding long-term support to the game, so players have a reason to revisit the game again and again and again. It's like, oh, the Banners of Ruin devs added a bunch of new bundles, let's try that out. It's also a really good way to just fill in dev time. If you know you've got this massive patch coming, you're like, oh, what are we going to do in between there? You know, you whip in a bundle, maybe you rebalance an old bundle. It's very good marketing. And you can just focus them in on specific niches. The current bundle that you start with is fairly balanced. You could go for the more focused ones. You could have like a full offensive one, a full defensive one built around buffing enemies, one about debuffing enemies, one for each specific debuff, bleed, cripple, poison, etc. You get the idea, right? Progression systems. So again, probably my main biggest issue with the game currently, the progression system. So what are some different progression system examples that could be used? So, as previously mentioned, starting card bundles could be something that you just naturally unlock as you play. You want to play, you reach level 10, here's you got the rogue card bundle, rather than you have these random things you unlock and then you nerf your overall efficiency. Races themselves, I think, would actually be a great way of having long-term progression. As I said, there are currently 6 races available, which is frankly too many. It's nice, it's good from a long-term point of view, but for a brand new player doesn't know what the difference between a bear and a wolf is. They'll just pick whichever animal they think looks cool, which is fine. Adding visual options is good, but each visual option comes with its own unique passives and talents. And as I said, I strongly suggest they make each race have its unique cards far more often. So by then, if they did that, and then they locked it to maybe you only start with the wolf, the weasel, and the hare, just picking at random as the 3 starting options, then as you play, you then unlock the other races. Again, it's a nice way to slowly introduce mechanics to new players. One of the big problems new players have with card games is if you're like, hey, there's this really cool game, there's 5,000 cards, you need to learn exactly what each one does. That can be very overwhelming. But by limiting the pool, by saying, oh, you've only got the 3 races to start with, it shrinks the pool a little bit, so it gives players an opportunity to learn that pool, and then they can learn more slowly bit by bit. It's also a great way of, again, adding further long-term support, because it could be like, okay, we've had a gear of Banners of Ruin, it's fully out now, we want to support it post-launch possibly, what do we do? Well, we could add a new race, we can add squirrels, and then we can add the squirrel deck, and then it gives players a reason to return back to the game, so they level up to unlock the squirrel rank, and then they can play with the squirrel stuff. It makes sense. And again, it's another way that you could also really lean into each race having specific niche and interesting quirky mechanics. You don't need to dilute the game at the very start by throwing all these crazy mechanics in, but by having each race tailored to a specific mechanic, and then slowly introducing those races and mechanics to players, you solve everything perfectly without overwhelming players, which is important. An alternate thing you could do would be having individual race XP. So you level up individual races. This would be another way of promoting players to play every single race. It's like, oh, you've played only mice and your mice are now at max level. maybe you could go play bears and level up your bear for a bit. So you could have it so you have to play games as mice to unlock all the mice talents or mice passives or whatever. You could also have it so that as you play it, you then unlock cosmetics. This is something that Hearthstone does. So in Hearthstone, you have to win 500 ranked games with a class, and you unlock a cosmetic. You gain an alternate portrait. This is something that you could do pretty well for banners. There's actually quite a few different ways that you could do this. So you could have it that, like, okay, do 100 runs as a hare, and then you could unlock maybe an alternate skin, where it's like, instead of a brown hair, you get the option of a white hair. Like, that's pretty easy to implement from an art point of view. You just need to do a reskin. You don't have to come up with any crazy new textures or anything. Currently, the only gear slots are armor and weapons. I don't know if they ever want to expand the armor system in the future. If they do, this next suggestion wouldn't be that great because it would limit that model. But you could also quite easily add in helmets and back attachments. They actually already have models for cloaks and stuff, but there isn't a cloak slot. A lot of the enemy models use helmets and cloaks, so they already have the assets and textures in there. So maybe in the future they might expand the gear system to have more slots, so ignore the suggestion. If they don't do that, they could very easily take those textures and have them as like, oh, you've won with the mouse 100 times, you've now unlocked the cloak. And then maybe if you get 200 games, you get the blue cloak or the red cloak. People like cosmetics. Like, cosmetics is something which people really care about. And it's also just provides bragging rights. It's great for community building. People post their screenshot like, wow, wait, hang on, you've got the crown? I want the crown. How do I get the crown? Oh god, I've got to play 1,000 games? I guess I'm playing this the rest of my life. Like, you know, it's good. Getting into events. So the events are the things where you get the choice of 3 cards. I think the events are one of the best things about the game, and they're currently really good, but here are just some suggestion events I would like to see. My favourite quest in all of gaming is the D2 quest. You could have it where you encounter a poor blacksmith and her hammer has been stolen by a big scary elite. If you help her and defeat the elite, she'll upgrade 1 piece of your equipment as a reward. So she'll increase it by 1 rank, so she could make your armor go from normal to superior quality. And maybe she could also increase your weapon by... they haven't currently got, like, superior versions of weapons, but you could have it so that you just gain +1 damage, just base damage, or lower the stamina cost by 1 or something. If it's fairly easy to implement, you could have it be a very rare encounter because it'd be a quite powerful effect, but that would feel really good. And also, upgrading your gear always just feels really nice, and it's one of my favorite quests. I add that. The other one, and this is one I think the most important thing: introduce named super dangerous roaming elites. So you have a super rare encounter that when you see this encounter, you're like, oh god, it's that dude. A lot of the encounters are just kind of like generic, like, here is a vendor, here is a faction. This game has a lot of interesting world building potential, but you never really see any of it in the game. So mostly just kind of like, it's kind of like the Dark Souls approach of show don't tell, which is fine, but then there's not actually that much to show currently. So anyway, you have these super dangerous roaming elites. And what you would do is you'd have these events serve a kind of chase encounter. Maybe you only see it once every 10 runs or so. But it would be a very high risk, very hard reward. Sorry, very high risk, very high reward. So you see the named dude, and he has a guaranteed named unique drop. So it's, do I want the super legendary 2-hand greatsword of awesomeness? Yes, it's the guy with the super 2-hand greatsword of awesomeness. But will that guy kill my entire party? Probably. Is it worth doing? Sod it. Yeah, let's do it anyway. These named encounters would be a perfect breeding ground for memes and also memorable moments for players, both of which are very important when it comes to growing a community. These memorable moments would make stories, this kind of thing you share with friends. People go, oh, that sounds cool, I want to play this game. And making your game easily memeable is good, because then that gets people to talk about the game, it proliferates, then get the Reddits and the Discords. Again, it'd be the equivalent of just like a headhunter kind of item for my PoE people. Stuff like that's just important for community building, and ignoring the community aspect, it would just be a really good addition to the game. On this notion of making events more memorable, I'd probably suggest renaming a lot of the generic events that currently exist. Some examples being Errant Knight or Crazy Weasel is another one. You see there's this really good art of this really weird looking weasel dude, and you're like, what's this guy's deal? And you talk to him and some fun stuff happens. If they renamed a lot of those generic titles to specific named NPCs and factions, it'd be a very small change, but it would do wonders for the world building, and it would again help players form deeper connections to the game itself. Using the Crazy Weasel example, do I care about Crazy Weasel? No. He looks cool, but Crazy Weasel means nothing. If he was called Erratic Errol, now something I care about, I'm like, oh, Erratic Errol's cool. Errol's a fun name. This guy looks cool. What's his deal? And again, it's about making players care about the world. They're more likely to have strong stories, and they're likely to share those stories. It's just great for world building and building communities. Gearing. Currently, I'd say there's a lot of options when it comes to the gear. I should be able to show that. Yeah, you can see there's a lot of options. So these are all different weapons currently available. There's also all different armors. All different armors have loads of different effects. There's currently enough, but more is always good. And again, fix the stash issue that I mentioned earlier. Maybe also introduce more variants to the starter gear. Having more variants to starter gear would just make starting more exciting. Don't let players start with the strongest weapons right away, but maybe have a bottom run of beginner gear for people to pick between. And again, this could be an option for long-term progression. Party composition. Reward having larger and more varied group composition. Currently, it feels like going upwards of a party of 4 is a trap, because of, as I mentioned, because of the way the XP works, and currently only being rewarded for stacking particular members. In theory, a larger group has more resources, so stamina, will, passives, and talents to utilize. However, what often happens is that I'll have 2, maybe 3 well-geared members with the best passives and talents, so I want to do all of my actions on, like that card I showed you earlier where when that character uses something, it poisons an enemy. While the rest of the group has dud actions, dud gear, and they just sit there awkwardly, sometimes eating up a hit, but just diluting my overall deck pool with their lesser equipment and talents. Again, talents, as previously mentioned, the balance isn't the best. Race-specific talents need to be much more common. Possibly cull back, or at the very least rebalance a lot of the talents currently existing in the game. And yeah, as I said, there's the whole reroll cost, but it's something which definitely needs to be addressed. And again, because with larger groups the XP is shared, you're far less likely to see talents, meaning you're far more likely to have the option of here are 3 bad talents, and I only get this option once instead of 3, 4, 5 times. Oaths. Again, oaths need more reward. I spoke about how stuff could be implemented differently, so they just need to be expanded upon as a system. It is also worth mentioning that currently there is a limit to only having 3 oaths available at once, so I assume they have plans for oaths. And again, if we go to the roadmap, they say like oath tiers, and I think we're currently like here. So it's definitely an early system. So that was a very long video, 1 hour. I apologize for that. It's very exhaustive. But I am very passionate about this game. I hope it came across and it shows. This is an amazing game that I highly recommend checking out. Yes, it has its problems. Yes, it has its faults, but it's in early access. The devs clearly care about the game. And even games that have been released 5 years ago and still getting support, Path of Exile, by the way, most games have problems. If I can come up with this many things about your game which I'd like to see added to or improved, it means I care about your game. And if I care about your game, then you've made a game worth caring about. So the devs probably haven't watched this video. If they have, they definitely haven't watched to the very end. But the fact that I'm this passionate is a good sign. I would highly recommend checking it out. I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Let me know if there are any other games you'd like to see me do this kind of content for, by the way. Bye-bye.